brief introduction to SundaeSwap, and then a brief introduction to Cardano, kind of zooming out. And then I'll hand it over to them to ask me some questions. So like I said, I'm Pi Lanningham. Yes, that is my real name after the number. I say that I'm a mathematician first and a software engineer second. I've been programming for just over 21 years, and I've been in crypto since 2009. Though I did leave it kind of very embittered for a while after my laptop was stolen with 150 Bitcoin. So been in crypto for a long time, been in programming for a long time. And this year I have started working on a project called SundaeSwap. So SundaeSwap is what's called a DEX. If you're not familiar with the term, that stands for decentralized exchange. And the basic idea is to serve kind of a very kind of core fundamental financial need of exchanging one asset for another, similar to the New York Stock Exchange or maybe Robinhood or something like that. But to do so in a way that's aligned with kind of the crypto ethos, where there is no single owner of the protocol of the exchange, and it is resistant to attack, it's resistant to hack, things like that. So at SundaeSwap, we are trying to decentralize not just the access to financial services, but the business and the profits from those financial services. And I can talk more about that if you guys have questions on that. We're building on what's known as the Cardano blockchain. So there are a number of different blockchains, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Cardano is kind of just one in a kind of now vast array of players in this space. And we chose to build on Cardano because of their kind of heavy emphasis on research. They kind of get ragged on a little bit in the industry because it has taken them quite a while to deliver what other chains have now, smart contracts, things like that. But the reason it's taken them a while is because they've been kind of moving at a slow, methodical pace and building up a lot of peer-reviewed research to underpin their model. And so they're one of the most, the IOG, the company that is building Cardano, is one of the most heavily cited research entities in the blockchain space. And so that emphasis on kind of the reliability and the soundness of the protocol really attracted me in particular, and then also my other co-founders. And we have found that a lot of the choices that Cardano has made lend themselves really well to building a DEX. And so it has been kind of a match made in heaven in a lot of cases. So that's it for my little introduction. If you have any questions that you want to ask, kind of just a moderated AMA makes sense to me.
Yeah, sounds good. So you gave a brief introduction onto what is a DEX. Could you maybe go a little bit further into some of the other financial services a DEX can provide? I know you can swap from one currency to another currency, but will SundaeSwap provide other alternatives like yield farming and staking and pooling? And if so, could you maybe elaborate and describe some of those concepts?
Yeah. So SundaeSwap is very close to our launch. I'm not going to give a hard date, but it should be in kind of the very near future, certainly before the end of the year. And at launch, we're focusing on that kind of core functionality that I mentioned, which is exchanging one asset for another in a non-custodial way. So SundaeSwap, the company, never has kind of custody of your assets, and there's nothing that can ever, barring a bug in the code, that could ever kind of cause you to lose them. What he mentioned in terms of other features, things like yield farming and staking and liquidity provision, we're kind of looking at a lot of those features, and I'll talk about what they are in a second, for post-launch. So for example, yield farming, the basic way that a DEX works, or at least the kind of DEX that we're building works, is through something called an automated market maker. So entities called liquidity providers deposit kind of two of an asset. So maybe a bunch of ADA and a bunch of Sundae tokens into the exchange, into a smart contract. And the ratio of assets in that smart contract behaves like a price of the token. And then somebody can deposit one of those tokens and withdraw the other. So you deposit a little bit of ADA and you withdraw some Sundae, or you deposit a little bit of Sundae and you withdraw some ADA. And that changes the ratio in the pool, and so the price goes up and down. That's kind of the basic functionality. Yield farming is a kind of broad envelope of different tools and features to incentivize people to keep their liquidity in the exchange. If I am a new business looking to build something in the crypto space, and I want my business and my services to integrate with an exchange to, for example, accept payment in a number of tokens and then swap them to something that is more stable that I can do business in, I need kind of very low volatility in those markets, and I need to be able to rely on the fact that a lot of that liquidity is not going to disappear and cause kind of high volatility and high kind of price swings that make my business unreliable. And so we want to incentivize people to leave their liquidity in the DEX long term. And so yield farming is one solution to that, where by offering people additional rewards on top of the fee that they're collecting as a liquidity provider, so an additional return, you can kind of incentivize that long-term parking of assets in the DEX. I'm not sure any others that you mentioned, but kind of a variety of features we're investigating for post-launch.
Thank you very much. Another question I'm wondering about is, how does a DEX go about choosing which tokens to list on the exchange?
Yeah, so different DEXs make different choices. Ours is an open protocol. So basically, we're building the software, but once we launch it, it exists independent of us. And it is going to be governed by a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. It's an open protocol in that anybody can create these pairs of tokens with liquidity in them that people can swap against. So to answer your question, whoever, the determining factor is whoever is willing to provide liquidity. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the space that we're in is that there is a slumbering giant that is beginning to wake up, which is the US government and the regulatory space. And so over the next couple of years, especially, there's going to be a lot of tumult and a lot of interesting developments in kind of what regulations the US government or the EU or the EU impose on spaces like ours. So that being said, some DEXs like Uniswap are taking are drawing a stark boundary between the services that they operate, like the front end that allows you to access the protocol, and the protocol itself, right? So on Uniswap, also, you can list any pair you want, but the Uniswap website only lists tokens that kind of they feel are safe regulatorily. And so if somebody else built a different front end for Uniswap, you could potentially interact with other tokens that are kind of riskier from a regulatory standpoint. And so SundaeSwap may have to take the same stance, but that's one really interesting thing that if anybody is kind of building a business in this space, you have to think about. You have to think, how do I defend myself today from the uncertainty of tomorrow?
That's very interesting. If we could maybe go further on to government regulation, do you see what role do you see the government taking in the future? What do you think their stance is right now? What do you know about any laws that are taking place that might be passed in the near future? And how will this change the way you structure and develop SundaeSwap in the future?
Yeah, I'm going to give kind of a very broad answer because I'm not SundaeSwap's legal counsel, so I want to be a little bit careful.
Yeah.
It's certainly a complex space, and you see provisions in things like the infrastructure bill that just passed that have big impacts and things like that. I can certainly tell you that at SundaeSwap, we believe the SEC does have a legitimate mandate to prevent scams, protect retail investors, avoid kind of money, put a damper on money laundering and terrorism financing. And so there's a very legitimate mandate for them to be filling. And so we see the SEC largely as allies, right? Everybody agrees with those goals. What has been unfortunate so far is the lack of clarity around how they want to tackle that, and the lack of kind of movement in providing updated laws that cover this. What we would certainly like to see from the government is a cooperative stance with people innovating in this space. That how do we build those kinds of protections and solve those goals in modern ways rather than just kind of, well, we don't like it, so we're going to stamp it out, and we're going to kind of prevent the innovation that could be happening around that. So we would certainly like to see kind of a cooperative stance with the SEC and with legislators, but I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know if that will actually happen.
Yeah, thank you. Going a little bit more onto the technical side for the programmers in the room and on Zoom, could you elaborate and tell us a little bit about the programming language or multiple languages that are used to code SundaeSwap? And did you have to learn this language, or have you been familiar with this language for a while? And just so explain a little bit about that. Yeah, for
sure. So Cardano is designed in such a way that its language programming model is extendable. So in the long term, it can support any language that somebody is willing to write a compiler for. So it has a provision that you can create different language models and even different virtual machines underpinning those language models. That being said, today it has one primary language, which is Plutus, which is a framework that is, or a dialect of Haskell. So you write some Haskell code and pass it through a different kind of compilation phase than you normally would. And that produces the byte code that runs on the blockchain. And that, for those that are really curious, that is a CEK interpreted virtual machine. So a large part of kind of the core smart contracts at SundaeSwap are written, or all of the core smart contracts are written in Haskell. And then a lot of the tooling around it, we've kind of grabbed a lot of languages. We've written some stuff in JavaScript, TypeScript, things like that. We've written a lot of Go. We've written a lot of some Rust. We've written a lot of Bash scripts to wire things together because we're moving fast as a fast-moving startup. So we use a lot of languages. Haskell in particular, I personally have been dabbling with since 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. But I've never built anything kind of substantial or of this magnitude. So it definitely has been a learning experience. And we solved for that by hiring some really, really talented Haskell engineers. And so really I've just been the directing the work and doing a lot of the research and development and the kind of planning out how the protocol is going to work. And my fantastic team has been translating that down into implementation. Sometimes I have to get my hands down in the mud and kind of help them out, but because we're so busy, we're moving so quickly. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Do you have any recommendations or advice for any of the programmers in the room or on Zoom that want to start to learn how to code, write smart contracts, but don't know really where to start or how to, get connected to some of these blockchain startups?
Yeah. So if you're interested in Cardano in particular, the resource that I learned Haskell from that I really enjoyed was a book. It's available for free online called Learn You a Haskell for Great Good. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, quirky take on Haskell, and it explains things really well. In terms of learning about the Cardano programming model and about something called EUTXO, I would recommend that there's a YouTube lecture series put out by IOG called the Plutus Pioneers Program. This is a series of, I think, 10 lectures that Lars, one of the kind of employees of IOG, did with a kind of cohort or class of students. And there's, weekly assignments and Q&As and stuff like that. It's super useful. They've done 2 of these classes now so that you have kind of lots of material to watch, kind of different ways that it's explained. You know, they learned, oh, this didn't go over so well in the first one, so they kind of adapted their explanation. It's a really great resource for learning that. For learning blockchain in general, you know, just get used to reading and thinking deeply about things. So the core concepts underlying the pieces of technology in the blockchain space are often very simple, but they are connected or utilized in very subtle ways often. And so the best piece of advice I can give for learning about in this space, in programming in general, but in crypto in particular, is that be prepared to let something sit with you for a while and kind of soak in the implications of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, I am very interested in learning about the culture of blockchain startups and, you know, how things work on a day-to-day basis. So I was wondering if you could tell us what made you decide to work for SundaeSwap, and then if you could tell us a little bit about like what your day-to-day looks like, your structure, and then maybe further out on a week or monthly basis.
Sure. So I joined SundaeSwap very early on. The project was formed in April, and I joined in early May. You know, we had 10,000 Twitter followers at the time, and the two co-founders, Artem and Mateen, approached me via email, and they said, "Hey, do you want to, you know, we're building a DEX on Cardano. Do you want to work on this?" I already had a strong interest in Cardano and in automated market makers. I had read in September of last year about Uniswap and had become fascinated by the concept. And so I just like really dove in and I said, yeah, let's do it. The thing that really sold me was back in 2011, I had my own foray into the startup world that didn't go so great. We were able to build a product. It wasn't crypto related, but we were able to build a product, but we weren't able to find people to use it. So that had kind of really dissuaded me from the like, oh, go do my own startup thing for a long time. That problem wasn't one that I felt I was equipped to solve. So when Mateen and Artem came to me with art, like within 2 weeks of the project starting, they had 10,000 Twitter followers. I'm like, great, they have that problem solved. I know I can deliver a product. And so it kind of is history from there. And now we're approaching 200,000 Twitter followers, which is insane to me. In terms of what my day-to-day looks like, it really early stage startup, it varies day to day. Some days I'm writing articles that we release for kind of some press and publicity that explain how our protocol works. Some days I'm helping my engineer debug something that, for whatever reason he can't figure out. And so I'm kind of rubber ducking with him and helping him, oh, have you tried this or have you eliminated this as a possibility? Some days I'm in the code and writing things. So for example, today, before this at the hotel and after this, when I go back to my hotel, I am working on some code. We're going to be electing a bunch of stake pool operators to kind of participate in something we're calling the ISO. Check our website and Twitter if you don't know what that means, or ask me a follow-up question. But I'm writing some code that is going to allow people to do an on-chain governance vote to select those stake pool operators. And so it reads kind of a stream of transactions on the blockchain and aggregates those up into votes for different stake pools. And so, I'm down in the guts of it writing some Go code. And so it really varies. On a longer term basis, the kind of higher level theme of a lot of what I do is focusing on where the research and development aspect of things is taking us. So how do we design our protocol? How do we solve for some of the constraints that and make intelligent trade-offs in some of the decisions that we have to make? And then what are some more esoteric models that we can explore post-launch? So, the automated market maker and the constant product pool that I described earlier is very hot right now. But what does it look like after that? How do we kind of innovate on that model even further?
Great. So since we just touched on it, I'll follow up. What is an ISO?
Yeah. So the ISO, initial stake pool offering, is kind of the thing that first put us on the map. So back in May, the naive younglings that we were thinking about how are we going to raise funds for our project. And Cardano has this unique mechanism where it is proof of stake, which means that you have a miner, kind of like you would have in Bitcoin, but instead of the resources that get you elected to produce a block being hardware, it is the native token itself. So the more ADA you have, the more likely you are to be elected leader to produce the block. And the people who run the nodes that do that are called stake pool operators. And so our idea at the time was, let's run one of these stake pools, collect all of the rewards from minting those blocks, and then for anybody who delegated to us and gave us their voting or their kind of election power for this block producing mechanism, let's distribute to them the Sundae token, right? And so it kind of had echoes of, or was not very similar to, but similar in spirit to something like an ICO, where it's like a public sale of the token. But instead of having to give us their token, it's almost as if they were giving up the interest rate in their bank account. And so we branded this idea of the ISO, and it kind of really took off. And now there are many other projects in the space who are doing their own ISOs. We actually ended up not running an ISO back then. We kind of started getting a lot of attention, and our CTO, who has a background in, at the time he was just kind of our DevOps hire, so we have since made him our CTO because he is fantastic. But he has a background in the security space, and he said, hey, wait a minute, this sounds an awful lot like a security, and it sounds an awful lot like you're about to sell unregulated securities. So we put it on pause, and we went and got a second legal opinion. And it turns out it was very, we were dealing with something that was a very hot wire, and we backed away from it. And we spent some time brainstorming, and we came up with a new model for the ISO that we believe does not make our token a security, because we don't intend for it to come with all the implications of future profit and future returns that a security would come with. Our token is a utility token that entitles you to a vote in the governance of the protocol. And the way that we are now running the ISO to make sure that we emphasize this is not a security is by launching the token only when there is a product or a protocol which makes it useful. Look up the Howey test if you're curious of why that makes a difference. But now our ISO, we're not collecting any rewards from it. You'll keep both your ADA kind of returns and then get some Sundae tokens on top. Largely for us, it's a marketing vehicle, right? People are getting some free Sundae, they're talking about the project, and it's also a vehicle to disperse the token among as diverse of a population as we can to kind of seed that voting, a diverse voting population. So that's the basic idea. That's what our ISO is. It will go live when our DEX goes live, which, like I said, is I'm not going to give a hard date on, but is coming up like a speeding bullet train.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. You touched on it a little bit, getting into the tokenomics of Sundae, talking about how it's a utility token. Is there any other economics behind it that you would want to go into at the moment?
Yeah, that is a very risky question to answer live, because it is all wrapped in legal implications, and I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea by a non-rehearsed answer. What I will do is reiterate, so the Sundae token, we're minting 2 billion tokens, and acquiring these will entitle you to a vote in the kind of decentralized governance of the protocol. Now, what might you vote on? You're going to vote on things like upgrades and new features to the protocol, right? So if a software company like SundaeSwap Labs, the software company, comes along and proposes, hey, we've built the code for, and we want to upgrade the protocol with this new feature, that is put to a vote among all people who are holding the Sunday token. And so we're really trying to create this almost decentralized hedge fund that manages the protocol. The DAO will also kind of hold onto or have voting rights over a treasury of any funds that the protocol collects for itself. So initially that is a supply of Sunday tokens. 55% of the supply is going to be owned by the community. 5% of that is going to the ISO. As it collects other income, day one, there are no features that collect income, but if the DAO extends it with additional ways to collect income, that will become kind of a treasury, a source of funds that they can do grants for future development. They can do, like they can vote to give that to charity, things like that. So we're really putting kind of the bulk of what the protocol does in the hands of the members of our community that care enough to acquire the kind of Sunday token.
Thanks.
Yeah.
A few questions in the chat. I'll move over.
Sure.
David asked, what specifically about Cardano smart contracts make it better for a DEX relative to something like Ethereum or Solana?
Sure. So one of the most fundamental, there's a lot of things to answer with this, but I'll kind of focus in on one that has been a hot topic recently. One of the most fundamental differences between Ethereum and Cardano is their accounting model. So this is how do they keep track of how much money you have. On Ethereum, it works very much like your bank. They have a variable somewhere for your account that says this is how much Ethereum you have. And when somebody transfers you Ethereum, it decrements their account and increments your account. And the same is true for any of the kind of ERC20 tokens. All an ERC20 token is a smart contract, which is keeping a balance of tokens for everybody and conforms to a standard interface for minting, burning, and sending tokens between people. On Cardano, it works a little bit more like cash. Basically, every piece of value in Cardano is the output of some previous transaction. So if I send you 10 ADA and I had 90 ADA, I'm going to be consuming the output of a previous transaction which sent me 90 ADA. And then the outputs of my transaction will be 10 ADA to you and 80 ADA back to me. And so they're in kind of value, instead of being in a balance somewhere, is in these pockets, these unspent transaction outputs. That's UTXO that get kind of split up and combined in kind of this flow graph. This makes programming on Cardano at first more difficult. You cannot just translate the things that you learned from Ethereum to Cardano. And if you try, it leads to things that don't work very well. And so you have to rethink the protocol design. You have to rethink how you are building things. But once you have done that, and you realize that on Cardano, state is fundamentally sharded. Each one of those UTXOs is a bundle of value that is completely ignorant of and independent of any other bundle of value on the blockchain. And it can have its own data associated with it that interacts with smart contracts. And validating a transaction only needs to know about its inputs and its outputs. It doesn't need to inspect the inputs or the state from anything else, which means that the transactions are entirely deterministic. On Ethereum, if you build and sign a transaction and submit it to the node that says, hey, yes, I would like to swap 10 ETH for however much Bitcoin or wrapped Bitcoin. And you sign and give away rights to that, and you trust the smart contract will do what's in your best interest by the time it gets to the node, which means the state may have changed, like somebody else may have executed swaps by the time that your transaction gets there. And so you may get an unfavorable trade different from what the price was when you built that transaction. On Cardano, because the state is sharded and you are explicitly declaring what data you are dependent on as inputs and what the outcome is, what kind of the output bundles of value are, there's no way that the state can change out from under you. This means that sometimes transactions fail and you need to resubmit them. And that's where the protocol design comes in to make sure that that happens rarely, if at all. So it gives you determinism of transactions, and it also gives you, it is much easier to build something like a layer 2 solution like Solana in Cardano than in Ethereum. In Ethereum, you have to figure out, how do I separate and divorce this state that I want to interact with so that I can move it to the secondary chain? You have to have complicated rollups or zero knowledge proofs and things like this. On Cardano, the state is already sharded, and you can just take that state and lock it up in a smart contract and start manipulating it on the layer 2. And then when kind of the cooperating parties agree and settle their layer or their transactions onto layer 1, it just disperses the end state to people. And this is called Hydra, and IOG's already demoed and is working towards a release of this protocol. But it is much easier to build these layer 2 accelerant solutions than it has been on Ethereum. And so that's just one way that, if we want to build a DEX that supports the next billion users and supports, I recently did some benchmarking on Uniswap to compare it to our protocol. And Uniswap, which is one of the biggest DEXs in the world, is doing 100,000 transactions per day. At peak, maybe 70 transactions per minute. And if you think about the New York Stock Exchange, where you have 100,000 transactions in a minute, in a second, maybe. If you want to support that level of financial activity, you need kind of these scalability solutions, and you need to be able to shard off local transactions in a way that you don't need global consensus, and then to be able to settle that back onto a chain that does have global consensus, kind of, when you want to move those funds around further. So I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. Before I go to any questions on Zoom, does anyone have questions? Oh.
Yeah, I actually. So I'm kind of confused on what's building the trust for the main chain to then trust, like, the off-chain transaction.
So you're talking about in this Hydra solution in particular? Okay, so for the audience, the question was, what is building the trust in layer 1 to kind of validate the transaction? To get a little bit technical, I'm sorry if I ramble, I have a known rambler, but the basic idea here is that a set of parties who somewhat trust each other collaborate, and they become what are known as Hydra heads. And this might be like 5 different businesses say, hey, we do a lot of inter-business transactions. And so it's very expensive to do all of those transactions on the layer 1 chain. So let's, for today or for the week, move those transactions off chain. And so what they do is everybody deposits their funds into a smart contract that holds those and knows what the private keys of each of the Hydra heads are. From there, the Hydra heads can conduct and update balances in whatever way they see fit. So they could do it via an account model, or they could do it through their own kind of isomorphic UTXO model. And every once in a while, they collectively all sign a snapshot that says, okay, yes, this is what the current state is, right? This is what we agree everybody's balance is. If somebody disagrees with that snapshot, you can abort the protocol, and the main chain unlocks funds according to whatever the most recently agreed upon snapshot was. And so you can accrue maybe like 7 or 8 of these snapshots where everybody has signed and kind of attested with their private keys to say, okay, yes, I agree that these transactions are all ones that we have agreed upon. But then when there's a dispute and one of the people says, hey, wait, I never actually submitted that transaction. It just requires one person to abort the protocol, and they can provide the most recent snapshot to the layer one smart contract and say, okay, here's a snapshot. You can see that it has the signature of every Hydra head. And so please disperse the funds. And then the smart contract on layer one gives a grace period for any other protocol to provide a later snapshot, right? So you can say, oh, the person was trying to abort with a snapshot from 6 hours ago, but here's a more recent one that we all agreed upon that let's settle the transactions with that. And so once kind of that grace period has expired and you have finalized on a final state of the chain, it disperses the funds kind of according to that final snapshot. And so it doesn't have the global consensus that the layer one does, right? That's very expensive to get everybody in the world to agree on something. But it does have consensus and kind of safe abort among cooperating entities that do a bunch of high volume traffic, right? So that's kind of at a high level how the Hydra protocol works. There's other interesting things in the design space around it. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Okay, so like, I'm gonna use like an analogy. So like, I know that you said it's not like it's SundaeSwap's not operating on a ledger like the other cryptocurrencies are, but I'm just gonna use ledger as like it's easier for me to imagine, right? So you've got all of the May transactions that are being accrued, and everyone trusts those past transactions because the chain it's working, it's moving forward in time. But then you're able to then step away from that that chain of transactions and say, all right, I'm going to create this liquidity pool where we're going to start like doing different transactions amongst ourselves. Like let's say there's like 1,000 people who are buying stuff on Amazon in a certain area, and then at the end of the day, Amazon goes, okay, it's the end of the day, there's no more transactions happening. This is all the balances of all of our different accounts. Everyone agrees, and it goes back.
Yeah, so one point of clarification there. I hope that the audience was able to pick that up. What I was describing is not necessarily how SundaeSwap works. It's how Hydra works, which is the scalability solution that IOG is building. We do have plans to investigate like what does SundaeSwap look like on Hydra so that we can support that scalability. But that might look slightly different than, for example, a liquidity pool or something like that. With that being said, yes, in kind of a generalized sense, it is maybe the way I think of it is like banks clear with each other at the end of the day or the week, right? And they say, okay, we tallied up all of our transactions, but then we need to settle and move money around according to the debts that we accrued with each other. And so it's kind of like that in that you move kind of a large volume of the transactions off among the entities which they are happening among. So it's not necessarily like Amazon and their customers. That's far more kind of participants than would be expected, but it would be something like different businesses that may be doing kind of brokerage, maybe that's a dangerous term, but like transactions between each other as businesses. And it's like thousands of transactions of like, oh, person A came to me and conducted such and such transaction. And so I went ahead and serviced them, but that means that you owe me, 10 ADA or whatever it is, among kind of a collaboration of businesses. And then at the end of the day, after they've, all agreed upon the final state of processing those 10 million transactions, they can just only settle the final state off chain without having to settle 10 million transactions off of the chain. Cool. Sorry if that got super in the weeds for anybody else.
Anyone feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, what's up?
I'm just kind of curious about what your take is on like the DeFi's environment in Cardano in general, and how like, because I know like DEX is really just like one player in the overall ecosystem. I'm wondering if how you.
So we've developed partnerships with a lot of kind of different DeFi protocols. So for example, one of our partners is a protocol called Liquid, which is a collateralized lending protocol. So the basic idea there is you lock up some of your ADA because you're very, you believe in the long-term kind of price stability or price increase of ADA, and you borrow against it. So that's liquid. So we've built a partnership with them. The specifics of that is they are, we're actually going to be using their governance smart contracts for our protocol, so that they get those audited and then we can kind of share those. We've built a partnership with Meld, which is a similar kind of protocol. We've got a protocol with a kind of small player that's near and dear to my heart called ADA Handle, which is human readable addresses. So instead of sending money to ADDR1EF ... you can send money to Pi. You know, so there are a number of these protocols, probably too many to list, and a couple that aren't announced yet that we've built. It feels really healthy. It feels like it's moving very fast, which a lot of people lose perspective on. From the time that smart contracts were released to the time of the first kind of groundbreaking DApp, I should say, or protocol, was 2 years on Ethereum. Solana released smart contracts in April of 2020 and is just now seeing their DeFi space come online. Cardano launched smart contracts September 12th, and you know, we and several other protocols are imminently launching, right? So that time to launch window is definitely shortening, and it's obviously really exciting for us. And it's really exciting to be building a DEX that so many other protocols will be using as liquidity, right? We're serving this key role in allowing this the free flowing of different tokens and exchanging of different tokens. And so we're going to be at the center of a lot of that action. So we're very excited about it. We feel that the ecosystem is very healthy, despite kind of the loss of perspective that has led to a lot of attacks on Cardano DeFi.
Anybody have any questions, or I can go back to answering on Zoom?
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what other players are you looking for? Because I know that the Cardano block or the Cardano ecosystem is nowhere near as built out as like ERC20 points and whatnot, right? So what are you hoping comes out soon, or are you in communications with anyone that's like?
Yeah, so the things that as a DEX we are most excited about or most interested in are the different types of tokens that would list on our DEX, right? We kind of live and breathe by, not we, the protocol lives and breathes by how many options people have and how much liquidity to kind of create that free flowing of information, of value. The two kind of categories that are most interesting are stablecoins. And IOG has done a lot of research on algorithmic stablecoins similar to MakerDAO. There's one that they are building called JED, D-J-E-D. And they have a lot of really interesting research on kind of formal verification of the bounds of how kind of volatile the price could be on this stablecoin. It's really clever. Go research it. It's fantastic. There are a number of other stablecoins that are launching on Cardano that we're interested in. And the reason we're interested in that is because if you look at something like Uniswap and you sort kind of top pools by volume, like the first 2 pages, with a few exceptions, are all stablecoin or native coin with some kind of tertiary utility token, right? So they form this kind of central linchpin of DeFi, it appears. They're also dangerous from a regulatory standpoint, right? We see the SEC kind of, they're not super happy about certain stablecoin projects. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that evolves over time in DeFi as a whole, not just necessarily DeFi on Cardano. The second class of things that we're really interested in launching are tokens with direct real world utility. And this may just be a personal excitement. I think tokens that are kind of for a particular protocol are all well and good and are very interesting. Ours is one such token. But the tokens that are really going to put crypto on the map is when we start tokenizing or we start integrating the real world services that we use and the real world economies that we use on blockchain. And that's where you start to see the promises that crypto has made and only partially delivered on in terms of kind of the efficiency and the like reducing the costs of the middleman and the marginal cost of doing financial transactions, right? I read about a project that is, for example, creating a token that is supposed to be pegged to the price of 1 pound of coffee. And the protocol design kind of is designed such that it benefits and directs profits towards struggling coffee bean farmers because the pandemic hit them particularly hard, apparently. And so I thought that was a really cool use of a global financial system to kind of identify a problem and target that problem in a way that, I forget what the protocol is named, and if the person in charge of that protocol sees this, I apologize for not giving you some advertising, but I thought that was particularly interesting, and I want to see more protocols and more tokens that are stepping beyond just, well, we built a thing that's purely digital, and so we have a token that's purely digital, right? How do we start to intermesh and deliver on the promises that crypto has been making for a decade now? Yeah.
Well, now that you said that, I was wondering, have you heard of a token called Banana Coin?
I have not.
Well, like a couple of years ago, I bought it, but like basically it's like they farm bananas and that's it. It's just like.
Ooh, what chain are they on?
I don't see it. Like, I'm pretty sure they said it was fraud now.
Okay.
I logged into my Banana Coin like last week, it's been years, and like they haven't made any updates, but.
Yeah, then that's another, so for those on the audience, he's talking about Banana Coin, which ostensibly was serving the same role, but now has a lot of controversy around it, apparently. And that's another problem that we as an industry have to solve, right? Like, we have a huge amount of potential ahead of us and things that we could unlock by kind of creating a global trustless consensus as a foundation for finance. But that has created with it a huge gremlin in the closet of scams are rampant, right? The education is not there yet where people understand what they're doing enough to be able to avoid, it is like phishing from, in the 90s and the early 2000s, magnified by, many orders of magnitude and far more dangerous to people's livelihoods. And so, this is an area that lots of people in the space are trying to solve, but nobody, has really made big progress on it. And so, I don't necessarily have a solution for you here today, but that's something that I'm very passionate about and that we will be thinking about at SundaeSwap. I'm not sure which had their hand up first. I think have you asked a question before? Yeah. So I'll answer your question first.
Okay, so if you had to start right now, like learning about blockchain and stuff, and you want to build something in let's say 2 to 3 years, and you don't know programming or anything, where would you start? I'm
a little bit biased. I would start on Cardano. And the main reason I answer that is because of your starting now and 2 to 3 years aspects of that question. So for those who are on the call, he asked if I started today, or if somebody wanted to start today learning about blockchain to build something 2 to 3 years from now, where would you start? And I'd say I'd start on Cardano, largely because of their focus. One of their kind of pillars of research is on interoperability between chains. And so I think that Cardano will become this hub through which you can conduct business across chain. You want to add a clarification?
Yeah. So, for example, like you say you start with Cardano, but how would you learn? Like, would you focus on the mathematics of it? Would you read papers? Would you learn different programming languages, maybe Haskell or?
I would identify a problem that you care about and want to solve, and then just let that be kind of your guiding star. And everything will fall out from that, right? You'll say, okay, well, what's the first thing I need to do to solve this problem? That may be, okay, well, it's just going to be easier for me to build it on Ethereum. It may be, okay, well, Cardano has the design that is the best fit for solving this problem. And then that will lead to the question, to the answer for, okay, what languages do I build this? Well, if it's on Cardano, today I need to build it in Haskell. Maybe by the time you start building, it supports other languages. And kind of the answers, being motivated by a good problem is a great way to help yourself uncover what your next steps are. Now you had a question.
Yeah, just like to go back, you were talking about the prevalency of scams and things like that. So I know, like, I'm just curious, would you say that you would place more of that, the like blame on that on the individual being scammed, or the like, just because at least in my experience, I found even for projects that can definitely be said to be not scams, there's a huge, it's pretty hard to trust anything that you see directly on the website. So I'm just curious, I think that's more of like a industry-wide problem, or like due to.
Sure. So the question is, with regards to scams, would I place the blame, so to speak, on the individual being scammed or elsewhere? And I definitely would not place it on the individual being scammed. I would place it on the industry's rush to find the next promise it can make without delivering on and solving the promises that it is, the checks that it has already written, right? We have not yet built up or figured out how to effectively educate people on these very hard concepts. We have not figured out the user interfaces that protect people from these things. So for example, MetaMask, one of the biggest Ethereum wallets, recently had a highly public kind of NFT scam where somebody had a bunch of NFTs. And there was a feature in MetaMask where you go to a specific tab and it has a QR code to with your private keys on it. And so when somebody was like sharing their screen, kind of trying to debug an issue, they didn't give anybody their seed phrase, they didn't give anybody their private keys, they didn't send any files. They were just screen sharing, trying to debug things. And they clicked onto a new tab and there was no warning that this was going to be there. There wasn't a confirmation. It didn't start blurred out, right? So like this kind of basic thinking is not yet percolated down into the tools we use, let alone into the people we're asking to use them. So I definitely think that a lot of the blame falls under, there's a lot of money to be made. And so people are very eager to make that money and not eager to think about the ethical implications of what they're building, right? Even outside of projects that are just obvious scams, there's people who are not thinking about the implications of what they are building, right? And so, yeah, definitely would not put it on the end user, right? It's not their fault that nobody's taught them.
Yeah, we are coming up here on time, and I wanted to kind of shift it back to a SundaeSwap focus. What's kind of the roadmap for the end of the year and into next year?
So the roadmap is right now, we are getting ready to conduct a vote to choose kind of the stake pool operators for our ISO. We are currently undergoing an audit for our smart contracts. So we hired a company called Runtime Verification. They've done a bunch of auditing for like the Cardano node itself. So they're a very respected kind of auditing company. And they are kind of reviewing our smart contract code to make sure that it kind of conforms to the spec that we laid out and there aren't any security flaws in it. Once that finishes, we can then launch the DEX and launch the ISO. And then we start thinking about what features do we add? You know, yield farming is a big one. There are some improvements that we think we can make to the market maker function underpinning the protocol. And we're going to start investigating layer 2 solutions like Hydra, like I was talking about earlier. Those are our kind of big ticket items. I'm sure there will be other things that we're considering, but that's our kind of roadmap from now onward.
Sounds good. You have time for like one more question, then
Yeah.
I'll just end it with another question. I think that's all. Another question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Cardano had any plans to do anything like NFTs.
Absolutely. There's already like hundreds of thousands of NFTs on Cardano. And there's already marketplaces. There's a great marketplace called CNFT. There's a great marketplace called SpaceBuds. Space Buds is a particular NFT project. It was the first minted NFT on collection on the blockchain. And this is a bit technical, but because of the way that Cardano has tackled something called native assets, it has been possible to mint tokens and thus NFTs since before it had smart contracts. Native tokens do not rely on smart contracts to be delivered. So there's already a rich NFT ecosystem.
And
Yeah,
the
last
last question here is, how big is your team now and how can students kind of get involved?
Yeah. So the question was, how big is our team and how can students get involved? Our team, it's fluctuating because we're doing a lot of hiring, is around 14 or 15 people. That is 4 people in leadership. We have 3 front-end engineers, a number of smart contract engineers. I'd have to count them up, but I'm not going to do that live. We have a graphic designer. We have legal counsel. We have some advisors, and we have a communications expert. I think he's actually on the Zoom.
I was talking to him earlier. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So.